Isaiah 60, verse 18.
Yeah, it's the border wall. 60 verse 18.
The border wall. God calls it salvation. All right, Esther. Esther chapter 3, and we finished somewhere. Esther 3, we only covered 11 verses, so we'll pick up at verse 12. Esther 3, verse 12. Then were the king's scribes called on the 13th day of the first month. And there was written according to all that Haman had commanded unto the king's lieutenants, and to the governors that were over every province, and to the rulers of every people of every province, according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, in the name of the king Ahasuerus, was it written, and sealed with the king's ring. And the letters were sent by the post unto the king's provinces, to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children, and women, in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to take the spoil of them for prey. Wow, nice people. Verse 14. The copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, that they should be ready against that day. And the post went out, being hastened by the king's commandment. And the decree was given in Shushan the palace. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city Shushan was perplexed. Okay, in verse 12, we see it's the 13th day of the first month. This is the day before Passover begins. For a Jew, Passover would have begun on the 14th. Well, they say the day right before that, we're going to kill them. So this is a law to annihilate all the Jews, all of them. Children, women, everything. Kill them all. That's tough. And it's written the day before the Jewish holiday, commemorating the nation's deliverance from Egypt. The 14th Passover is a celebration of we've been freed from bondage. Now, Haman's going to reverse it. The day before it, we're going to kill him, show him who's in control. Now, I don't know if he knew all the history of Israel and what the days meant, but this is the way it fell out. That's from Haman's point of view. He's going to issue an execution order for all Jews the day before their national holiday. From the Lord's point of view, Haman's going to end up just like Pharaoh. Pharaoh thought he could take care of the Jews, and God took care of him. Well, God's going to take care of Haman as well. In verse 13, and the letters were sent by post unto all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to take the spoil of them for prey. Okay, in verse 13, we have a decree that was written on the 13th day. Whole bunch of 13s in there. And it's a decree to kill all Jews, a satanic thing, and every time it shows up, it's a picture of the Antichrist. Because he shows up, and that's what he's going to do. He wants to eliminate all Jews, because that's the seed that he said in Genesis 3 was going to destroy the serpent. You see a word in there, post. Let's find the word again. He sent it by post. And the letters were sent by post. Okay, obviously it doesn't mean post office, but that's where the word comes from. That is, someone is carrying the message. Postman, we use the same derivative of the word. Parcel post. So that's a dispatch. It's somebody carrying goods or a message from point A to point B. So the Bible is current. Even though it's ancient, it's current. We're still using it. We're still using the same terminology. The word used by Henry VIII was post haste. And you'll hear that word used. It means hurry. The way that came about is this. Let me find it.
We still have the same post office.
Yeah. Oh, he says, post, that means run. Haste for thy life. So Henry VIII had a message he wanted sent, and he said, post, that is, carry this message. And then he said, haste for your life. If you don't get it done quick enough, I'll come kill you. And he was not a nice guy. So that's where the word post haste comes from. In modern terms, it would be like the medical field, they use stat. Okay, that means hurry it up in a quick, as fast as you can go. Okay, so some of our words mean more than one thing. We understand that. So post here obviously doesn't mean something sticking out of the ground. A word can have more than one meaning, and ours do all the time. So somebody will try to take you to that passage and say post there is antiquated and we don't need it because a post is something that sticks out of the ground. Well, no, we're still using a derivative of the word, so we understand it. Verse 13. And the letters were sent by post unto all the king's provinces to destroy it. We already read that. Verse 14. The copy of the writing for commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, that they should be ready against that day. Now, we should be ready against that day too, but we'll look at our verse. As far as just making a practical application, there's a lot of good information in there that we can make application from. Death is a universal decree. Here there's a decree given that the Jews are going to die. We've been given a decree too. The wages of sin is death. There's a decree given. Now, not everybody knew about it, but the more people learned about it, the more it caused turmoil. In our day and age, the problem is people find out about it and they don't care. But if they really could see eternity in hell for what it is, then they would be, just like this verse, all of Shushan was perplexed. When they can get a real glimpse of the death decree that's been given, the soul that sinneth shall surely die, then they'll be perplexed as well. Life's short. Solomon said, there's no man that hath power over the spirit to retain the spirit, neither hath he power in the day of death. There's no discharge in that war. If a man can get a hold of the decree and understand the penalty for just being a descendant of Adam, then you've got something you can work with. But until they realize that, you got to get them to that point. Unless the rapture takes place, all of us are going to die. Now, I think it's going to take place pretty quick. I think we're right on the edge of it. Of course, people have been saying that for years, but I think we really are.
Within 10 years.
So we should be ready against that day. We should be ready for that day. Either death or the rapture. We should be ready if it happens tonight or tomorrow or whenever. We should be ready because there's an account that happens after that. If you're not saved, the accounting will be lake of fire, hell. If you're saved, the accounting will be every man's going to give account of his works, what you've done and not done. This is written to the Gentiles to get ready to kill the Jews. So they knew an actual date. They had a date given. For us, we don't have an actual date. We're on the other side of it, flip side. We're Gentiles waiting for the day that we'll either die or get caught up. So it's a little different. It's hard to force this thing into a pure application as far as where we sit in the dispensations. But we can make devotional applications, practical applications. This is more like tribulation, just like the book, where the Gentiles are the ones persecuting Israel and giving them a day they're going to die. Obviously, Armageddon happens and there's a war declared. This day, this time, we're wiping them all out. So we got to make sure that we've made preparations for death. For some reason, that's always a taboo subject to get into with people. They don't want to talk about death. But death is something that needs to be talked about because it's 100% positive that it's going to happen.
Mortality rate is 100%.
That's right. After death, you're going to end up somewhere. So that's got to be prepared for. They prepare for a 401k, they prepare for college, they prepare for everything but death. No reason for that. Death is sure. In Luke 12, Jesus talked to the rich young man who had all the junk and said, "Hey, I'm going to tear down my barns and build some bigger ones." He said, "Look, you've not prepared for death. Tomorrow your soul is going to be required of you." He called that man a fool. So if anyone lives life, no matter how smart they claim to be, and they've not prepared for death, according to Jesus, they're a fool. There's a famous story about a court jester. This is a jester is somebody who comes in and makes the king laugh. This jester is the king's favorite jester. He could always make the king laugh. And the king said, "Hey, I tell you what, do this. Go out into my kingdom, all of my reign, and find someone as funny as you, as big a fool as what you are." And so he went and he went and he went and he came back. And in the meantime, the king had gotten old and was ready to die. He came back and the king was on his deathbed. And he said, "King, are you going to be all right?" And he's like, "No, I'm about to take a journey." And he said, "But did you find a fool bigger than you?" And he said, "No, I couldn't find anybody bigger than me." The jester said, "Well, where are you taking a trip?" The jester didn't understand he was about to die. He said, "Where are you going?" He said, "Well, I don't really know." And he said, "Well, did you make plans for your trip?" And he said, "No, I've not made any plans." And he said, "King, I found the fool bigger than me." Anybody who doesn't make plans for life after death is the biggest fool there is, according to Jesus' own words. And not just saving from hell, but for eternity. Even a Christian had better be making plans for eternity. We're going to be judged. There's a judgment that comes for saved people. Our works, everything we say, think, or do, is going to be scrutinized. So because of that, we've got to make preparations. And you can every day count yourself as the fool. Every day at the end of the day, you should do an accounting. You should calculate it. Say, okay, how big a fool was I today? Okay, I lingered too long on that thought. I had a bad attitude there when I shouldn't have. Simple. It doesn't have to be that complicated. I mean, you can find foolishness real quick.
You keep looking at me.
Right, he's right there. No. Okay, so the king and Haman sit down and they are having a little private party. They're going to have a little drink fest. Always notice that alcohol is connected to something wicked. Always. So they're sitting there drinking and having a good time while the city's perplexed. They don't care about their city. Their city is worried to death. That's no bother to us. Haman's thinking, okay, this is a good deal. I'm going to get rid of all the Jews. The king doesn't really understand. He just thinks he's getting some business taken care of, and it's not really going to cost him. Haman's going to pay him back. No doubt in the city, it says all the city is perplexed. No doubt in the city, there's those who did not have an idea of what was going on. You can count on that. In a minute, we'll see Esther didn't know what was going on, and all the ladies in waiting didn't know. Even the ones who were the maids and I don't know what you call the male maids, but whatever. Yeah, those people. They didn't know what was going on. They didn't understand the decree or hadn't heard it. So there were pockets of people who hadn't gotten the message, but as a whole, the city itself was perplexed. Now that's interesting to note because you'll find this all throughout the Bible. When he gives you a blanket statement on something, he doesn't necessarily mean every individual. He may mean as a group. For instance, when he's talking about the nation rejecting Jesus Christ, well, many individuals did not, but as a whole, the nation. So he can say something in a broad term, and it doesn't mean every single aspect of the term. So here he's saying the whole city was perplexed. Obviously they weren't because some of them didn't know. But as a whole, the tally would be more perplexed than unperplexed. So there's those who probably didn't have any idea, and they're in no position to say anything. And besides, why say anything? It's not them anyway. It's the Jews. It's the outcasts. And I'm sure there's those who were in agreement with Haman. Yeah, let's get them. Let's get rid of them. I've seen some of those Jews take my job, and they've got some nice stuff. You said once we kill them, we can take their stuff. I got my eye on some couches over there I want, that type of thing. And then there's probably those who knew and had plans to help them. And they thought what was going on was wrong, and they're going to try to hide them. Always happens with the Jews. The same thing happened with Hitler. Not every German was an anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic Nazi.
That's right.
Not all of them. There was a lot of them who were good people. Israel says this. They recognize 19,700 what they call righteous Gentiles. Those are people who are Gentiles, not Jews, that saved their people. So the nation of Israel has recognized that many people who were trying to hide and help the Jewish people. Even though it wasn't affecting them, they weren't the ones that had their neck on the chopping block. But they recognized wrong and they were going to do something about it. By and large, though, most people do just what the Jews did. Hey, why even get involved? It's not going to affect me. Yeah, I don't really like it, but whatever. Wrong has to be stood against. And, okay, so let's get on with our story. Haman and Ahasuerus are sitting there drinking and having a good old time. And doctrinally speaking, if we apply this doctrinally, it's a prophetic thing about what's going to happen in the tribulation. It'll be the Antichrist and Satan sitting there having them a good time, and the false prophet thinking they're going to destroy the Jews. And the same thing's going to happen. God's going to turn the tables. You don't mess with my people unless I said go mess with them. And even then, I'm going to come back and destroy you. During the tribulation, something's going to happen. And people don't talk about this. Look at Isaiah chapter 6. There's going to be some death take place in the tribulation of the Jews. Isaiah 6, verse 10. It says, make the heart of this people fat, and make their ears heavy, and shut their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and be converted, and be healed. That's one of the most used verses in the New Testament. Then said I, Lord, how long? And he answered, until the city be waste without inhabitants, and the houses without man, and the land be utterly desolate. And the Lord have removed men far away, and there be a great forsaking in the midst of the land. But yet in it shall be a tenth. Does that mean anything to you, a tenth? That word should remind you of something. The thing that preachers love to talk about, a tithe. This is what tithe is a picture of. All the way through in the Old Testament, he told them to give a tithe. Why? Because it's a picture of Israel when they did something wrong, what God was going to do to them. The tithe was always something that was eaten. So what happens here? And it shall be a tenth, and it shall return and be eaten. Cannibalism. And a teal tree and an oak tree, as a teal tree and as an oak tree, whose substance is in them, and when they cast their leaves, so the holy seed shall be the substance thereof. Tribulation, the beheading, is not just simply to kill them, it's to go in the supermarket. Nasty stuff. But that's what the tithe was all about. It's 10%. So if preachers want to get up and preach tithe, that's not a blessing to anybody. That's a curse. How about a free will offering? That's much better. Yeah. That's okay. So that's the end of chapter 3, and we'll start chapter 4 and see where we go with that. Chapter 4. chapter 4. That's a long one, but we'll get it started anyway. Chapter 4, verse 1. When Mordecai perceived all that was done, Mordecai rent his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes, and went out in the midst of the city and cried with a loud voice and a bitter cry, and came even before the king's gate, for none might enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. And in every province, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was a great mourning among the Jews, and fasting, and weeping, and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. There's a whole lot in that little section. He's given you a picture of something. Remember, this whole book is pictorial. This whole book is going to explain the rest of the Bible and draw things together and show you in pictorial form what God's doing. It's a picture of flesh being torn, this renting of the clothes. And Hebrews 10:20 talks about the veil being rent. That's there equating Christ's body with the veil being torn. So what do? They do it in type. They tear their clothes as though they're being torn up physically. Next, Mordecai puts on sackcloth and ashes. The sackcloth is rough clothes. You find it again in the is it Isaiah, Jeremiah, somewhere around in there. He says, in the millennium, if somebody wears sackcloth, they're doing it to fool you and thrust them through with a spear. Okay, so the sackcloth is rough clothes, as though I'm humble, I'm mourning. Well, in Christ's presence, there's no sad days. In his presence is fullness of joy. So when he's here physically, there shouldn't be any of that sackcloth. But here there is. At funerals, they put dust and ashes on their head, or on the body, and so they put them on their head, like they're already in the grave and they're being covered. Yeah, they're dramatic. That's right. They're dramatic people, and so all of this stuff has meaning. They cried with a loud and bitter cry. So that just like a person going to hell, their final end after the death, the ashes and the dust on the head, is in hell, weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. It's all a picture of ultimate torment. But what's going to happen to the Jew in the concentration camps of World War II is going to be nothing compared to what's going to happen in the tribulation. Tribulation, more of the same. So it's a trial run for what's to come. It's also a picture of something else. It's a picture of Jesus Christ taking the torment for us. Because he did all that. He was put in the ground. His body was torn. All of that stuff happened to him. He deposited my sin in hell. Okay, if somebody did it for me, then I'm in the Civil War. They had a deal. You did not, if you were rich, you didn't have to go to war. Up north, now I don't know about the South, but I know about the North because I had relatives who did it, or my family did. You could pay someone to fight in your name to go to war. That's all we've done. We've paid someone, not really paid, he paid it all. But Jesus has done it all for us. So we don't have to go through all that torment. But somebody who's not accepted it, they're going to take it. And it's decreed. And I got a bunch of verses there we're going to skip. Okay, so Mordecai is mourning, and he's upset about what's going on. And instead of going into the king's gate and sitting in there where his normal office is, I say office, I don't mean it like our office, but that was his position, was he would be one of the counselors in the gate. So instead of sitting in the gate, he's got sackcloth and ash on, and he can't go in the gate. That's not a good representation of the government, so he's not allowed in there. So he goes before the gate, so he stands outside like Joe Public. No one's allowed in the king's court, sad or depressed. Now, Jesus doesn't require the same of us, but he suggests it. You can be sad and depressed and go into his court, and it won't be long before you won't be if you go in with the right mind. However, it's a good idea to go into his court many times when you're not sad and depressed. Does he get the idea when you show up, some tragedy has to have transpired? If that's the only time you show up, he'll be sure you have plenty of it, because he likes to see you. So get in a habit of showing up when things are going good. He says in Psalms 100, in verse 2 and verse 4, I'll just read you the salient passage here. He says, serve the Lord with gladness. That's what we're supposed to do. Come before his presence with singing. That's the way he wants to see you. That's a suggestion. Now, he'll take you anyway, but he likes to see you come in that way. He says, enter into his gates with thanksgiving and into his courts with praise. Just like the old kings of Persia, they only wanted people to show up who were happy and cheerful and, a good attitude for the environment. Well, that's what Jesus likes. Now, he'll take you when you got problems too. That's what separates him from man. However, that shouldn't be the only time we show up.
That's right.
Verse 3 shows Mordecai shows this thing that's going on with Mordecai is not just limited to Mordecai. It's the whole nation. It's the other Jews that know about this thing. Now that's important. There's strength in numbers. That's why he says when two or three people are gathered together to pray, I'm there in the midst. Now he's already in the midst because he's in us. But there's something special about a group getting together. Something special about that. Here, if it had just been Mordecai, it probably wouldn't have been as powerful. But since the whole city, all the Jews have found out about this thing and they're upset, it's going to start making a statement. The neighbors are going to start finding out. When these guys are crying with a loud voice and making such a big racket, the word's going to spread. There's strength in numbers. At FedEx, we didn't have a union. And because of that, unions are good or bad, and I can see both taking place probably in the same company. You can see both good and bad. But we didn't have a union, so a lot of times we get taken advantage of without any representation. Well, one of the things they started wanting us to do, they keep wanting more and more of you, and they would say, you have to, they called it pre-trip your vehicle. That is, you have to go over, make sure there's no dents in it, check the oil, the preliminary things. Make sure your brake lights are working, all that stuff. Well, they said it should take you about 5 minutes to do that, and that has to be done off of the clock. That needs to be done before you clock in. So, right, on your time. Well, we couldn't ever get anybody to do anything about it at the same time. You get one person upset over here and then one over there, but nobody collectively. If collectively everybody got upset about it, something would happen. Now, there were stations where they did. I heard about one station where they all went to their truck and they clocked in, went to their truck and waited for 5 minutes and then did it. Said, you're going to require 5 minutes from me, I'm going to require 5 minutes from you. But that's what they're doing. There's strength in numbers here. All of them, as a collective unit, are doing the same thing, and now he's going to take it right to the king's gate. He's not going in, he's representing the public. The Jews are mourning, and they've added something different to it. Now they're fasting. Now he doesn't say they're praying, but obviously they must be praying. That's what a Jew would do. If a Jew's fasting, he's crying out to his God. That's Jehovah. This whole book, you don't find God in it. You can see him behind the scenes and you can imagine him in there, but it's not mentioned. They're out of their land and they're not really thinking about God. These are the people who could have gone back under Cyrus's decree, and they didn't. And let's see, do we want to go any farther? What they're doing by fasting is this. This is interesting. They're depriving themselves of food. If you don't eat, you don't survive very long. So they're depriving themselves of food, but it's not simply depriving yourself of food. A fast is a picture of something. A fast is a picture of I'm depriving myself of food and I'm living 100% at your mercy for my survival. So God's sustaining them without food. They're still living. That's the picture. And so the picture here is, hey, look, we're at your mercy. Everybody else is trying to kill us. Our survival is going to depend 100% on you. And obviously it gets God's attention because he's got some things orchestrated, and the story's going to do a 180 here in a little bit. But we're not there yet, and we'll pick up next week on verse 4.